Blackballed. 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 Blackballed.
What is up, everybody? My name is James D. Fury, and this is Blackballed. In Canada, we found out during the pandemic that several companies that were owned by the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, aka the Plymouth Brethren Crazy Cult, were given sole source contracts to bring in PPE for the pandemic. Now, these companies were not companies that specialized in any of these types of products before. In fact, one of them, called Klondike Lubricants, which is the company that the Klondike papers were named after, imported and sold oil, like industrial oil, harsh weather oil, and things like that. So it was bizarre to a lot of people to see companies like that being awarded contracts worth sometimes tens or hundreds of millions of dollars when they didn't even specialize in the equipment that they were responsible for bringing in. There's also been, in a couple of countries, including Canada, complaints about the quality of the PPE that came in. But what I wanted to do over the last month is try to figure out a way to expose the businesses that are owned by the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, and also the network in the UBT companies that are all owned by the Plymouth Brethren, the obscene amounts of money that they make. And I wanted to find experts who could help us sort of unpack how the political connections work, how the business connections work, and how much they profit from their political connections. And I was pointed out to this guy maybe, 6 months ago, I think. And we've been trying to work out a way for him to come on the show, and we found a way. And so I'd like to welcome my guest today. His name is Damian Hastie. Damian, how are you, buddy?
I'm good. Thanks for the invite. It's great to be on, James. Hope you're well.
Thank you. I hope you're well as well. So before we get into sort of the nitty gritty here, you're not an ex-Brethren member.
No, not at all. And probably similar to you, up to May 2020, I never heard of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church.
Yeah, that's me as well. So what made you decide to sort of embark on this? You have a website called openandcandid.com where you have a treasure trove of documents and research and information about the businesses owned by the PBCC. What was the motivation to get you started?
I think it all started was during the end of COVID lockdown. Obviously, over in the UK, we spent billions on PPE, and in the UK there is some transparency around where them contracts have gone to, similar to Canada in that aspect. And what actually happened was, more out of in sort of curiosity and intrigue, was I looked at where these contracts were going as they were being published in the UK. And I still remember the first one I found for the cult, the commercial Plymouth Brethren commercial cult, as I look at it, rather than the crazy cult. And the first one I found was a company called Medco Solutions that had won a PPE contract for circa 80 million. And just following the directors, which you can do in the UK's Companies House, to see what other connections, what other companies they're involved in. I came across the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, and at that time didn't really think too much about it. Just thought, well, that's odd. However, 2 days later, I was looking at another company, Top Elm Limited, and again a link to this Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. So then I started looking at each contract to see if I could find further links to the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. Literally within 24 hours, I'd found 13 of the contracts linked straight back to the church.
Wow.
And that's where it all started.
Okay. they have a long history in the UK. That's actually where they originated from, in Plymouth, England. And they've also had their tax exempt status removed. Is it once or twice in the last like 30 years?
I'm only aware really back in 2013, what actually happened was one of the gospel halls, one of the meeting rooms, had their their charitable status removed by the Charity Commission over here in the UK. And they appealed it because obviously that was going to impact on all the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church gospel halls. I believe there's 130 of these gospel halls, meeting rooms across the UK. And they fought tooth and nail to keep their charity status. It was a big piece, 2012 through to 2016, when it was fully overturned, and they kept their charitable status at that time. My research into that is it's very difficult to pin down how much it is actually worth. I believe it's 30 million UK pounds per year just in the UK, of which of that 30 million they spend about £1 million towards the Rapid Relief Team and other charities to show what good they do. I'm pretty sure everybody would, if you were offered 30 million, James, but you had to spend £1 million to show how good you were, I'm pretty sure you'd do it.
I think that Richard Pryor starred in a movie once called Brewster's Millions that was literally about that. See if he could spend $30 million in 30 days, I think. So, okay. I often actually say out loud in this podcast that it feels like Western democracies have a fatal flaw within their respective constitutions or charter of rights, or just the way that their legislation works when it comes to freedom of religion. And I still think that, but I'm also thinking now on the, I mean, it seems obvious when I say it, but the Plymouth Brethren are probably exploiting the freedom of religion and then finding a way to monetize that exploitation. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think it is. My personal view is that the church obviously was a church to start off with, but under the current leader, Bruce Hales, it has become a commercial enterprise which hides behind the church. And in reality, for me, you look at, as you say, the Western democracies and the governments, and there is this, well, people are free to follow their religious beliefs, but at the same time, I have no problem with them following their religious beliefs, other than some of the well-documented issues regarding separation, child abuse, and things like that. However, when I look at the church and think, why have they got charitable status? They've only got charitable status so they can spend money. It's a tax. It's a tax. They're using tax loopholes to make money.
And their workforce is largely fueled by true believers.
Yes. Yeah. In reality, if you look at all their companies, and I suppose when I go back, and this is probably the nerdy side, the geeky side of myself, once I'd started finding these contracts, what I very quickly realised on Companies House, that if you started, and I actually started with a company in Northern Ireland, and from there I just followed the companies that them directors were related to, and then that just opened up the whole chain. It was like dominoes falling, and I found circa 1,500 companies in the UK that were Plymouth Brethren owned.
Wow. The complaint that a lot of people in Canada have, that I mentioned in the intro, was the government offering and awarding government contracts for PPE to companies that didn't deal with PPE. Brethren-owned companies that dealt with completely different types of industries. Front companies, I guess you would say. Was that something that was happening in the UK as well with the contracts that were being given to them? And what kind of companies were they really, and while receiving PPE contracts?
I think one of the things that probably has been probably the hardest thing to explain to people is that in the UK, if I look not just at PPE but look at the rapid antigen tests, lateral flow tests, whatever you want to call them, they won on them as well. They won circa 2.2 to £2.5 billion worth of contracts in the UK. If you look at that, the major two companies that won them contracts were Unispace, who later became Santi Global, which was owned by both Unispace and Santi Global are owned by Charles and Gareth Hales, who are two of the sons of Bruce Hales. And the other big winner is a company called Medco Solutions. Medco Solutions didn't exist until the end of March 2020. It was a newly incorporated business with two directors, brothers Ross and Luke Robertson. Ross Robertson worked for Unispace up until that point. So, and the Medco Solutions in Australia and in the US is owned by Dean Hales, brother of Gareth and Charles, and son of Bruce. So the two biggest winners, and they equate to about 1.9 billion UK pounds of the 2.2, are directly sons of Bruce Hales. And within that, Unispace were an office design firm. So if you were a company looking to redesign your facilities in your offices, Unispace were one of the companies that worked in that market. Medco Solutions, as I said, didn't exist.
Huh. Okay. You sent me a bunch of images, and I'm going to post them one by one and then ask you to sort of unpack it for us.
Okay.
Because I noticed that there's certain terminologies that the UK uses, like over here, turnover means, the rate in which employees come and go inside a company. But there, it seems to have a financial definition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The turnover in the UK is basically the gross sales. So how many sales they made in total.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, so let's start with this one. What are we looking at, and why is it significant?
So this is a tweet from 2014. Grant Shapps is a Conservative MP. He's been Transport Secretary. He's currently the Business Secretary. Quite a controversial guy. But moving aside from his background, this picture is taken alongside another MP at a company called Havwoods. Havwoods are based in the north of England, but they're also based in Australia. They're a flooring company doing laminate wooden floors. In the picture, also, I think it's either Simon or Oliver Wiley. And the Wiley family are Brethren members, quite high-ranking Brethren members. And the Havwoods business in Australia, and part of it in the UK, is owned by Dean Hales. Now, one of the things that I've looked at is where the Brethren are really, really strong from a commercial perspective is that they lobby their Conservative MPs all the time. And it isn't for the size of the church and for the amount of businesses they've got. You can find so many pictures of MPs at them businesses, and that is they're actively lobbying. But what is interesting is how high up it goes. So you've got Grant Shapps is in the UK cabinet, so he's a cabinet minister. So he'd be one of the top 20, 30 ranking MPs in the UK, government MPs. So I've got pictures of him, Richie Sunak, the PM, Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, all visiting. So on this picture, if you look at that, that was taken from April last year. That's Richie Sunak, and he's meeting a business in Stokesley in Northern England, and that is the James family in the background. predominant Brethren people who do have connections actually to the Wileys as well, at Harwoods. All these businesses interlink, so that the way they operate is
Sorry,
very.
just so the Canadian audience understands, that is currently the man in the front is your current prime minister.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Is there no appetite in the British press to ask cabinet ministers in a scrum or whatever, are you comfortable doing business with people who oppress women, who oppress gay people, who cover up child abuse?
I don't believe that. We get some. I've had some coverage. We've had the Sunday Times cover it, which is a leading Sunday newspaper. The Times covered it earlier this year, but always from a sort of a voyeuristic look of, oh look, this church is connected. Nobody really goes into question, and I speak to a lot of journalists from people like the BBC, all the major newspapers in the UK, and every time it is, can you show us almost damning evidence that is linked to a MP? And I kind of look at it and think, well, I can do the research, but it needs somebody else to do that bit. You're the people that can take that to the MPs. I think we did have a little bit of joy the end of last year. There is a thing in the UK called the Good Law Project, and the Good Law Project, basically what they do is they fight the cases where they believe the government aren't following processes, or that there is a story there. And they highlighted our current Culture Secretary, Michelle Donnellan, and her connection. So she's married to somebody who's left the Brethren. I know without doubt, I can prove the evidence. There we have. That's Michelle Donnellan in the middle. They're based down in Chippenham, which is home to quite a decent sized Brethren community. Next to her is Tom Turner. So Tom is from the Turner family, was working for Brethren companies, obviously a member of the Brethren, and they are now husband and wife. As part of that, Tom has left the Brethren, but still works with there's still family ties. A number of the Turners work for a company called Stronghold Global, who have also supplied PPE according to their website. If you look at that story alone, to me, is one that we still haven't dug into it enough. Because if I look at that, the contract, so Tom Turner there, his father, Ben Turner, won one of the very first PPE contracts. They run, or his father runs a company that supplies shoes. So safety shoes for hospitals, for nurses, doctors, etc. A company called Top Elm. And when you look at that, they were one of the very first, in the first 3 contracts awarded without competition in the UK when the pandemic started. I think they were number 3, the first British company. And at the time, I still think, how did that happen? How did they become one of the very first companies to win a PPE contract when they weren't a PPE company? And the son, who was still a director of the business up until just prior to that, ends up being married to a current MP and cabinet minister.
That kind of it spotlights the hypocrisy as well. I mean, if you're abused by an elder, and they excommunicate you, you're done for life. They ghost you. But if you marry a powerful politician, they're just like, okay, well, technically you're not part of the Brethren anymore, but we still love you, and please keep on running this awesome company and keep making us money, right?
So I ended up with a contact within company within the company that Tom Turner worked at. So a Brethren ran company, and basically him and his two cousins had left the Brethren. Yet the Brethren still deal with them. Their family still go into that premises of that company, offering support and working with them. And where else in the Brethren would that happen?
Yeah.
Where there is power, it's total hypocrisy.
It must have been awful when they first got together because they couldn't even eat together. I'll take you out for dinner. It's table for one. I'll take care of the check before you get there. Right? Okay. Let's take a look at this. What are we looking at here?
So this one's always interested me again because no journalist seems to have really picked up on this. Within the UK, all government contracts, similar to Canada, are published. If you are to go in and look at this and search for Santee Global, which is the Hales, Charles and Gareth Hales, sons of Bruce, they own Santee Global. If you went in to search for a contract for Santee Global, you would not find this contract. However, if you search for Sterilab or Mornington, you would find it. It's only when you open the contract that you find out that Santee are actually behind the contract. And Sterilab is another Brethren ran business, which is why it was picked up. But to me, that says that's a joint contract. So why isn't Santee Global's name even on the front page?
Did Santee's Global, did they own that company?
So Sterilab own it. They were part of the South African Brethren that came over. Well, South Africa, when they left South Africa in '99, they moved to various parts, Canada.
Hold on a second.
Australia,
They left South Africa because I guess apartheid was over and they didn't feel welcome anymore. Is that the idea?
I'm not sure of the full story. I've heard a couple.
Let's just go with that, Damian. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, this is a £273 million. I don't know. Not sure what the current exchange rate is with Canada, but I'd imagine that's at least $300 million. Contract.
Oh, more than that. It's probably closer to 400 million, I would imagine. Yeah.
Lacks transparency.
No, it's and so why would they? Okay, what would be the motive to hide the other company's name? Like, if they're both owned by Brethren, why is it important that one company is shielded? Is it because that company had nothing to do with the type of contract they were receiving?
I think part of it is obviously Santee Global is linked to originally the Hales owned Unispace, the office design business, and they sold Unispace towards the end of 2020, and then formed Santee Global. Unispace has been in the news in the UK quite a lot around the contracts for their PPE. I genuinely, it could just be a clerical error, but it seems odd that the company that one of the biggest PPE winners are almost hidden away on the testing side of things. Mm-hmm. This isn't PPE. This was for the rapid antigen testing.
Oh, okay. What are we looking at? So this one says second call off.
So that's how you would find it. It just says awarded supplier Sterilab services.
Oh, right. Okay. So that is connected to that previous document. Where are we? There's a couple more. This one.
So this was going back to where the lobbying and the fact that they can get to the highest people in government. This is Armaguard down in Fareham on the south coast of England. And that would be, I'm trying to remember the name of the family at Armaguard. Can't remember the name of the family, but obviously that's them with our current Home Secretary, Suella Braverman.
Yeah, I mean it goes on and on. I mean, and we have. And do you have a guy like this in your country? This is Gerald Shapur. He is he used to be the lawyer for our former Prime Minister, Stephen Harper. He used to be the general counsel for Prime Minister Harper's party, the Conservative Party of Canada. He was also the general counsel for the two previous Conservative parties that came before the Conservative Party of Canada existed. Our Conservative Party has gone through three different metamorphoses because they were the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada, and they didn't want to be progressive anymore. So they went to the Reform Party and then the Canadian Alliance Party until they settled on the Conservative Party of Canada. But this guy was the lawyer for the prime ministers and that party through all its incarnations. And also the lawyer who represents the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. So the same lawyer that represents the most powerful politicians in our country also represents the shadiest cult in our country. And I was wondering if there was a figure that sort of was the connecting tissue between those two worlds like that in the UK.
Not that I'm aware of. There is a company, a law company in London, that definitely represents the Brethren on a number of occasions and has a lot of high-profile clients, but no individual, I would say, from a legal perspective. It is slightly different from a business, sort of whether that be the accountancy services or the business creation. There is a couple of names that crop up again and again and again, but with no links to that I can find to government. But are non-brethren and definitely work a lot with setting up brethren companies.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of the way that the mafia uses non-mafia members to do things like run numbers. So in a gambling operation, a mafia captain will give a sheet of paper to like a kid or some 20-something young guy who's not connected to the mafia, and he'll go uptown and he'll drop off the numbers to the bookie that also works for the mafia. But if he gets caught, he'll take the fall. But he's also the way that the bookies and the mafia can communicate with each other without actually having to communicate with each other. Mm-hmm. And it feels like that. It also feels, of course, like the mafia, the way that Bruce Hales gets paid in stuffed envelopes of cash all the time, which again is just the most Sopranos thing I've ever heard. Culturally, in the UK, there's no appetite from the media side, it seems like, and like we've just discussed, to ask the right questions. How much of is there a public interest? Is the public interested in this kind of stuff? And how much of a household name is the Brethren in the UK?
Probably answering in reverse. I still think it's not a household name. I think they go under the radar. I think partly because of the way they're spread out across the UK. So I reckon they're probably in anywhere between 90 and 110 different locations across the UK. They weave a web. So actually, what might be interesting when you pick up, for example, a Brethren company in London or a Brethren company in Scotland, their whole setup makes it harder to uncover anything that might be wrong. And then I think when you talked about the press angle before, I think the other thing is that the Brethren do seem to have from what I've read and seen and witnessed, is they have the money to take people to court. So I'm sure it's no different in Canada, but in the UK, the newspapers aren't making the money that they made before. Online news has taken over. Stories are quick and simple. If there's any risk at all that they could end up in a legal argument with a company, the stories aren't run. And I think there is the interest, simply because we've had 12 years of a Conservative government that, and particularly over the last 3 or 4 years, is constantly linked to dubious, suspicious, if not corrupt practices. So there is an interest from that perspective, from a business perspective. I also think there is from the general abuse, the shutting up, the excommunicating. I think there is a public interest story there. I just feel that there is almost a fear of
The
what that will
litigiousness.
entail.
Yeah, they're very litigious. I'm actually surprised that I haven't been served with papers yet, to be honest with you, because I've done, I don't even know how many podcasts now on this group, maybe 35, something like that, or 40, at least 50 hours of material. And you know, they haven't bothered to knock on my door. Maybe they don't think I'm important enough or big enough for them, and that's fine. Like, you know, I'm not really afraid of them. I had cars parked outside where I was staying in the summer for a couple nights. That was interesting. But you know, there's a part of me that's so cynical about this whole story, because when you talk about the government contracts that they get here, we haven't had a conservative government since 2015. And so for the last 7 years, we've had a liberal government. As far as I know, and if Richard Marsh, if you're watching and you want to correct me on this, if you happen to know, please do so. But as far as I know, no Plymouth-owned company has received some sort of hefty contract from the federal government. But provincially, all of the provinces that were led by conservative governments during the pandemic, all of those provinces gave sole source contracts to the Plymouth Brethren. Is it like that in the UK as well? Like, how does the difference how do you differentiate federal from provincial in the UK?
So there's there's probably three ways of getting a government contract in the UK. One is from a main government department, so a national government contract that will be, like in the pandemic, they were from the Department of Health and Social Care. So that would be one. The second one would be kind of local councils, so local regional sort of government, pretty much what you were saying there, similar to Canada. But there's also a third way in the UK, and that is sort of buying consortium groups. So, for example, it might be, there is one that covers particularly fire service, police, and they'll buy for lots of different, they'll do a tender process where lots of different fire services can then use the companies that have been awarded that tender. So there's probably three ways of doing it. What I would say is that in the UK, the Brethren have been successful on all three. I would say particularly on the last one. And I think that links into the rapid relief team as well. It isn't unusual to see that shot of the rapid relief team handing out burgers and sausages at the local fire service open day. If you dig a little bit deeper, you'll find that fire service also happens to buy their safety equipment, their uniforms from a Brethren-owned business.
Have you been threatened with any legal action since you started down this road?
I had just one sort of, I tweeted once quite early actually, and just a kind of, was I aiming, would I highlight if these were all Jewish companies? And
what a stupid question.
And that came from somebody, a high up lawyer, barrister within a company that has worked with the Brethren before. But apart from that, no, nothing.
What was your answer to that unbelievably ignorant question?
I just ignored it.
Oh, good. It's not worth answering. The whole reason that, you know, that this bothers people like you and I and countless others so much is because of how they treat the people that are in their localities, and especially how they treat the people that are banished from those localities.
Yeah, for me, there's two things that drive me on. One is I don't believe they need the charitable status. I don't, and actually that is a waste of taxpayers' money that could go somewhere else. That could be I say if I hazard a guess, it's 30 million UK a year, so what call that 50 million Canadian dollars a year. I don't believe the Brethren need that money.
No.
And actually, when you do that over 9-10 years, that's you're starting getting into big numbers. So that drives me. And the second bit is the total hypocrisy of how they deal. And one of the things that drives me crazy is the amount of times that you will go on. If you go and look at Tucson Limited, so Tucson was set up by the Wiley family of Habwoods that we had a picture up before of.
What a name! What a name for that family. Oh, because they are pretty wily, aren't they?
Yeah. So that business, Tucson, is actually owned by Dean Hales and the Wileys, and Tucson was set up by the Brethren. If you go and look at Tucson's website, and look at their people on there is only one of them that is Brethren. So actually, everybody else came from UK government department during the pandemic, in the test and trace department. And you look at that, all them people on there are non-Brethren. So they're using people that aren't Brethren to make their money now. And I think this will be more and more to the fore, that where a company's successful or they see an opportunity, that they'll use non-Brethren people to make their money if they've got the connections and the background to drive that business forward. They talk all the time around, they big up their diversity within these companies, the fact that they're anti-slavery. And you go and look at the day-to-day of a Brethren family or people that have been excommunicated or left the Brethren, it is totally at odds with what they are doing and the way they preach. You'll see rapid relief teams at events that are totally against what their church is really like. So it's all a mask, it's all PR.
I wonder if there's a way to get the media. I mean, I've been thinking about this for so long, and I feel like I'm, treading water, I guess. But I mean, the media right now really loves social justice stories, for better or worse. But I mean, it'd be nice to feed the British media stories about the 2 or 3 cases that I can think of off the top of my head where a member of the Plymouth Brethren, came out as gay or was caught masturbating, and they got a Plymouth doctor to give that person pills that would chemically castrate them. Or the oppression of women, the systematic oppression of women. We had Laura Payne on. Mm-hmm. She's from San Antonio. She's an ex-member. And she described being a woman inside the Brethren as basically like being a slave, indentured servitude, the way that they're not allowed to speak unless they have permission. Jesus Christ, there's no Italians in the Brethren then. It's impossible. I'll tell you that right now. There's not one Italian woman or Dominican that I've ever met that would need permission to speak. But these are the kinds of things, like when I see pictures like this one, and when I see pictures, and this is Michelle Donlan. Is she the MP for Chippenham? Is that?
Yeah.
And she's also the cultural minister. Is that right?
Yes.
All right.
She was a cultural minister, and before that, she was the education minister for a day. And prior to that, she was the universities minister. So it's almost as if she follows roles that a Brethren member can't go to university. So Donlan was the university minister, and then to become culture minister, it's laughable.
So if there is a member of the UK press that is listening or will eventually listen to this, ask Michelle Donlan, do you feel comfortable awarding contracts to companies owned by a cult who oppresses women systematically? And see what she said. Like how? I mean, I'm sure she'll pivot out of it. She'll be like, "Well, I'm not sure, if I understand what the question." Like she'll find a way to pivot out. But the question needs to be in the ether. It is shocking to me, and it's not just the UK; it's Canada too. I think Australia probably has a better track record than both of our countries when it comes to sort of calling truth to power in this thing. But these are the kinds of questions that are going to chip away at this group. And they're just not being asked. I noticed in your Twitter bio that the Times have dubbed you. What did they say? That you were a
I
professional
can't
researcher. What did they say again?
yeah, research. And I can't remember the exact words that they used.
That your site, Open End Candid, is an investigative platform.
Yeah.
Do you have relationships with members of the press at all?
Yeah, basically through my research and what I've tweeted, yes, I have built up a network. I do have connections, both TV and mainstream national newspapers. Um, the appetite, unless you've basically done the work, isn't there?
You know, I mean, you guys are the tabloid capital of the world,
Mm-hmm.
but all your tabloid papers are conservative, aren't they?
Yes. Well, apart from the Mirror, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one. Like I can understand why people get really frustrated going down this rabbit hole, because the rabbit hole goes forever, and the light at the end of the tunnel is when you give up and climb back up.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But I still believe that. I think one of the problems that the Brethren have got is there's too much money now. I put an article up on only yesterday regarding where some of the money goes via the Universal Business Team. That they've restructured in the UK. Who owns the Universal Business Team? So UBT. They've moved it across to, I think, away from a charity. And I think the reason they've done that, without knowing that, I can only hazard a guess, is that that's transparency. The other bit is that the charity, the Grace Trust, which owns UBT in the UK, actually has too much money. They are sat on, at the end of last year, 52 million in the bank as a charity. That's after giving 30 odd million away. So that they're struggling to give that money away. I also think the money will corrupt in the end. One of the big pieces I'm doing at the moment looks at how much. If you look at a typical Brethren community, and I'll use a couple in Scotland that I've looked at. What it seems to me is they run probably between 90 and 150 people in each community. That might be 30, 40 households. But within that, that's literally only usually 7 or 8 families with the odd person that's married in. Within them 7 or 8 families, you will find that there is usually 3 or 4 businesses worth 4 million Canadian or 2.5 million UK. So, and that's in assets. So actually, if they sold them businesses, they're probably worth a lot more. So the money's there. There's so much money. Where does it stop? And I think money will be the thing that brings them down.
I'm sorry, I'm asking you a question that I don't know the answer to, and I don't know if you do either. But just when you're talking there, I thought of it. When it comes to taxes, I'm wondering why Bruce Hales hasn't been audited when there is clear evidence that he receives cash from all around the world all the time. Do you know of anything of any time he's been audited in the past?
I don't. What I will say is the links between Australia and the UK are significant in both government terms. So I think, without any proof, but it's something that I have wondered, and if there is any possibility of it, I'm not saying there is or there isn't, but some of the names involved in Australia and the UK government have links to the Brethren in both countries, and I'm amazed that Hales hasn't been looked at further. And in the UK, I just, one of the things I regularly come across, probably since starting this, is the surprise, really, that if you want to commit a fraud, go big, make sure it's complex in size. Because in the UK, only one person's been done for insider trading in the last 8 years. So our actual policing and auditing of anything financial is really poor. And I'm not convinced Australia is any better.
Yeah, the Americans are like that too. After the financial crisis, the only guy to go to jail was this low-level brown person. You know,
It's like the Big Short. I always remember in the Big Short at the end of that film, them saying all these bankers were sent to prison, and they said,
that's
not
right.
really.
Yeah.
We'll be in the same position in 10 years' time, blaming it on the immigrants and the poor people, and that's all that ever happens.
It's funny that you bring that up because I just used the analogy of Christian Bale's role in that movie as the guy who looked under the hood in the subprime mortgage scandal and
Mhm.
saw what all of these mortgages embedded inside the tranches that were given AAA ratings. He actually looked at thousands of them and realized that these tranches were being propped up by ratings that should have been C instead of AAA, and that's why
Yeah.
he shorted the housing market. And I always thought that it would be a good idea for a government official or an auditor to do the same thing, to look at all of the different chapters or localities and look at whether and audit them and look at whether or not they deserve their charitable status. Because we have the same rapid relief team here, and you know they show up at firemen's fundraiser or whatever. You know, they get, I don't know how much they receive as far as a grant for doing it or whatever, but you know, they go and they spend money as cheaply as possible on like Costco meats instead of buying something nice. And then they leave, and then you find out that they were like funded to the tune of like $2 million the year before, and they went to like 5 barbecues, you know,
Mhm.
like
The interesting one on the rapid relief team is if you look at their global report last year, there's some real anomalies in there. For example, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like in New Zealand, they served 40,000 meals and they spent 300,000 New Zealand dollars. And in the UK, they did less meals but spent 3 times as much. There's no pattern to it. It almost feels at times that someone's just booking numbers when you
also a
read the
$7
rapid.
meal is like, you
Yeah.
know, wedding at the Legion, you know, I don't know.
Mhm.
It's not something I would hang my hat on. Okay, so you are working on you're always working on stuff. Let me ask you about your mental health because this could take a toll on most people. How are you doing? You know, is it something that you need to take a break from once in a while, or are you just like getting on with it?
I think sometimes I take a break. Definitely towards the end, I think it was last year, probably had a couple of months, probably September, October, I didn't do an awful lot. It is hard to keep uncovering stuff or researching. And I think one of the hardest things is actually the way the information is presented. It's so complex. There's a lot of numbers in there. And I still believe, probably like you, is that actually it's the social stories that will make the difference, not the business stories. But the business stories are often a way in to try and open the doors to social stories. For me, mentally, I just keep plodding along. I some days I'll look at a lot, other days I won't look at much. If something tweet, I follow certain things, so I'll get LinkedIn notices or I'll get UK company house notices, so that might then make me want to look at something else. And sometimes the pressure's time; you just don't have the time to actually give it what it needs. I think in the UK, the ex-Brethren community, maybe slightly different from Canada. I think generally the ex-Brethren community tend to have left the Brethren 10, 15 years plus. I think one of the things that the UK lacks is the people that are leading the Brethren currently don't seem to be communicating outside the Brethren as much. I could be wrong on that, but
Oh,
I
that's
don't.
just a British thing. Just kidding.
Mhm. Well, there's one at the moment. I'd love to speak to him. Left the Brethren in the last 2 years and was at a company that won a PPE contract.
Oh, yeah. I was going to ask you
I
earlier.
reached out to him, but with no reply. And I think sometimes is that people are almost suspicious of what you're doing, and I
Yeah.
think that can be hard because in reality, all you're trying to do is get the story out there and fix it. If you've left the Brethren, you've left the Brethren for a reason.
Excuse me.
Wouldn't it be great if you could have stayed in and not been part of the commercial cult and rather than part of a church?
Yeah, I've been fortunate here. I haven't done a lot of reaching out because I have people reaching out to me because of the courageous people like Cheryl Hope and Richard Marsh who have come on my show several times. And that has just resulted in people reaching out to me. I'm not sure how comfortable I think I've done it once or twice, but I'm not sure how well received I'm going to be reaching out to an ex-brethren member that's just trying to live their life. Like I would feel like Geraldo or something, like a tabloidy and whatever. So, but yeah, it is kind of rather unfortunate that we don't have a way to sort of amalgamate these ex-members and create a political action group or something, so that they can do some of the spotlighting. What I wanted to ask you earlier is there, have you ran into any companies who are direct competitors with cult-owned companies and talk to them about what their competitors are up to and why they should be exercising some sort of PR war?
I mean, I've been approached through the Open and Candid website 3 times now by competitors of cult businesses, questioning their practices, particularly in one area where contracts were just rolling over and being won year in, year out. So that I think there is there, but again, they don't know where to take them. And these aren't a couple of these out of the 3 that have approached. 2 of them were considerable sized companies that feel that the Brethren gain an advantage through some practices that they don't believe are particularly ethical.
See, those are the companies that need to develop strategies that hone in on the social stuff. And
the other area that I've tried to focus in on, and I've had some success, but not enough, is in the UK. I talked about the sort of 3 ways that you could win a contract. So you could go on to you could win a tender, but you win that contract with other companies. It's like a framework agreement where that might be to supply. We'll talk PPE. That might be supply 10 million sets of gloves, and 10 different companies are awarded that contract, and whoever's buying can go to any of them companies to buy gloves. What isn't unusual in the UK is to see there's 10 companies won, and 5 of them are Brethren-owned companies, different companies. And my question there, and I keep asking this, is if I'm the buyer, if I'm the person awarding that contract, I don't know them 5 companies are linked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which to me then says that they've got a control of the market.
Yeah, they're like Nestle now. Like Nestle owns Aero and Kit Kat and all of these different brands, but not everyone, but like they don't hide the fact that it's a Nestle company. It's right on the package,
Yeah.
And there's a reason why they don't do that there. Well, listen, I found this really interesting. I would love to have you back. Every time that you unearth something new, you are welcome to come back and share it with us anytime that you want.
I'd love to, James.
I appreciate your time today. Damian Hastie, thank you very much for joining us.
James, thank you very much.
Have a good one, sir. Yeah, he's another one of those guys that does the heavy lifting. Like, I'm not even qualified to try to research businessy stuff. I get confused. I didn't even know what turnover was as far as UK lingo goes, because I guess I was too lazy to Google it or something. But I love having guys like that sort of in my network, because I'd rather surround myself with competent people than try to pretend that I'm competent at something. And Damian Hastie is one of those guys. Richard Marsh put me onto him months ago and told me, you got to follow this guy. He's a brilliant researcher. He knows what he's doing, and he's motivated. And this is really what gets me going in a positive way and gets me excited about the possibility of this organization being dismantled slowly but surely, is that he's motivated by justice. He's not motivated by money or a sense of vengeance or anything. And that is not a shot across the bow at ex-members, obviously, but to have someone that isn't motivated or that is motivated solely by this like obvious perception that a lack of justice is taking place and that corruption is probably afoot is to me one of the greatest allies that you can have on your side when it comes to this kind of stuff. So again, my big thanks to Damian Hastie for coming out today. I appreciate that. I'm just looking at my calendar now. On Tuesday, I have an epidemiologist on. His name is Eric Fiegelding. He is a CNN correspondent, I believe. He's got a massive following, I think of like 800,000 people online. And he's just going to talk to us about the latest chapter of COVID, the latest variants, how we should be interpreting the isolated and somewhat anecdotal cases of vaccine injuries, because they are happening, just not to the extent that Chris Guy would say that they're happening. But we want to make sure that we tell the whole story when we talk about certain subjects. I am not afraid to say that vaccines are hurting people sometimes. I'm still pro-vaccine. I am vaccinated, so are my kids. But I think it's just it's interesting to have a medical professional on, so I don't have to sit there and pretend that I know what I'm talking about when it comes to this kind of stuff. So I thank you also, everybody, for watching. I really appreciate it. I'm just busting your balls. You can talk about your stupid fucking pancakes in the comments all you want. I will find a way to serve digital beverages to you. I do appreciate you. I don't know why you guys talk to each other about recipes, but it's fine. Engagement is engagement. Even if you're absolutely not engaged at all in the actual podcast, you're still there. Stuff is happening. It's like a stock ticker. You don't know if it's good or bad because you don't know how to read it, or you don't want it to be distracting to you, but it's there. You can see it move, and that's great. So I appreciate all of that. No, I'm just kidding. You guys know I love you. And we will see you next time on Blackballed. Thank you.
Blackballed. 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 Blackballed.